There is a deadline running on your lavender right now, and almost nobody watching this knows what date it falls on. It is not the same date for everyone. In Zone 4, Minnesota, it has probably already passed. In Zone 8, Georgia, you have another 6 weeks. And the entire difference between a lavender that comes back next spring as a tight silver dome and one that comes back as a split open woody ring with a dead crater in the middle comes down to whether you acted before your deadline or after it. Most American gardeners will do nothing to their lavender in August. The plant looks acceptable. Some spikes are still holding color. The bees are still working it on warm afternoons. There is no obvious emergency, so there is no obvious reason to touch it. That is exactly the reasoning that produces the 5-year-old lavender that has to be dug out and replaced. Not neglect, not disease, not a bad winter, just a gardener who looked at a plant that seemed fine and decided August was a rest month. August is not a rest month for lavender. It is the last month that matters until next spring. Drop your US state or USDA zone in the comments right now. Your deadline is different from the deadline of the person watching this in another part of the country, and I want to make sure you know which side of it you are standing on. I read every single one. Let's go. Step 1. Find your deadline before you do anything else. Every instruction in this video depends on one number, the number of weeks between today and your average first frost date. Not your last frost in spring, your first frost in fall. That is the number that determines whether you cut your lavender this weekend or leave it entirely alone until next year. Here is why that number governs everything. Cutting lavender triggers new growth. That new growth emerges soft, green, and completely unhardened. It needs roughly 6 to 8 weeks of growing weather to firm up and harden off before cold arrives. Cut with 8 weeks of season remaining, and that new growth matures into wood that survives winter. Cut with 3 weeks remaining, and you have pushed a plant into producing tender tissue that gets flash-killed by the first hard frost, and the damage does not stop at the new growth. Frost-killed tissue on a lavender becomes an entry point for the crown rot that takes the whole plant out over winter. So find your number. If your first frost typically arrives in late September, zones 3, 4, and the colder half of 5, your cutting window has already closed or closes within days. In zones 5 and 6 with early to mid-October frost, you have a narrow window in the first 10 days of August, and then you stop. In zones 7 and 8 with November frost, you have the entire month of August and into early September. In zones 9 and 10, frost is not the limiting factor at all, and your timing is driven by bloom cycle rather than cold. If you are past your window, that is not a disaster. It is information. Skip the cutting section entirely, do everything else on this list, and put the cut on your calendar for early July next year. A lavender that goes uncut for one season is a lavender that gets slightly leggier. A lavender cut 3 weeks before frost is a lavender you may be replacing. Tell me in the comments, what is your typical first frost date, and have you cut your lavender yet this year? Drop your state below. I read every single one. Step 2. Read the spikes, not the plant. If your window is still open, the plant itself tells you when to make the cut. Not the calendar, the spikes. Walk out and look at individual flower spikes rather than at the shrub as a whole. Early in the season, each spike is a saturated violet. The small florets plump, the color deep, the fragrance releasing at a touch. As the bloom cycle finishes, those spikes shift in a specific and readable sequence. The color dulls first, moving from rich purple toward a washed gray lilac. Then individual florets begin dropping or shriveling. Then the spike stops reading as a flower and starts reading as a seed head. Your trigger is roughly half. When about half the spikes on the plant have made that shift, act. Not when the plant is at full bloom. You would be throwing away flowers you paid a whole season for. And not when every last spike is brown and crisp. By then, the plant has already committed weeks of energy to seed production that should have gone into new growth. There is a second signal that works even better than looking at the spikes. And it costs you nothing. Watch the bees. A lavender that was covered in bees 3 weeks ago and now gets occasional casual visits is a lavender whose nectar production has finished. The insects register the change before it becomes obvious to a human eye. When the bees lose interest, the plant is telling you it is done with this bloom cycle. Step 3. The cut and the line you never cross. This is the single most consequential action on the entire list and the one where most gardeners fail in one of two opposite directions. The first failure is timidity, snipping off the spent flower stalks and nothing else. This tidies the plant and accomplishes almost nothing structurally. Lavender that only ever gets its flower stems removed grows steadily leggier every season. The woody base extends upward, the green growth retreats to the tips, and by year 5 you have a plant that is mostly bare stems with a thin fringe of foliage at the top. The second failure is ambition, cutting hard into the thick brown woody stems at the base to reduce the plant's size or reshape it. This is not a setback. This is usually fatal to whatever portion of the plant you cut. Lavender does not carry reliable dormant buds in old wood. Cut into brown rigid stems and you will be looking at those exact same bare stumps next May with nothing emerging from them. The correct August cut sits between those two errors. Remove the spent flower stem plus approximately the top third of the green leafy growth beneath it. That is deeper than deadheading and nowhere near the woody base. The boundary is visible on every single stem if you look at it before you cut. Above the line, soft, flexible, silver green, carrying leaves. Below the line, brown, rigid, bare. Your blades stay above that line without exception. Every time, on every stem. There is no situation in August where crossing into brown wood improves your outcome. As you work, shape the plant into a gently rounded dome. This is not decorative. A domed lavender sheds winter rain and snowmelt off its surface rather than letting moisture pool in the center of the crown. And crown moisture in cold weather is the mechanism behind the majority of lavender winter deaths in American gardens. A flat-topped or dished lavender collects water in exactly the spot where the plant can least tolerate it. One instruction before you move on. Do not compost your trimmings. Set aside a handful of the best non-flowering stems in a jar of water in the shade. We are coming back to them at the end of this video. If you are not subscribed yet, hit that button right now. This channel releases zone-specific plant knowledge every single week that changes outcomes in real American gardens. Free. 2 seconds. Do it now. Step 4. Put the hose down. August is the month when the caring instinct does the most damage to this particular plant. Everything else in your garden is stressed. The containers need daily water. The vegetables are wilting by afternoon. So when you make your watering rounds, the lavender gets included because skipping it feels like neglect. Here's the reality that most American gardeners never hear stated directly. Lavender's leading killer in August is not heat and it is not drought. It is moisture sitting around the crown and root zone in warm weather. Warm plus wet is the precise combination that root rot and crown rot require to establish. And a lavender in the early stages of root rot wilts, which looks exactly like thirst, which prompts more watering, which accelerates the rot. That cycle can take a silver healthy plant to collapsed and gray in about 2 weeks. A wilting lavender in August is far more likely drowning than thirsty. Before you water anything, push a finger 3 to 4 inches into the soil at the root zone. If there is any moisture at that depth, walk away. The August watering rules by situation. Established in-ground lavender in its second year or beyond gets nothing in a normal week. Its root system runs deep, and it evolved on hillsides that bake all summer without irrigation. Only during a genuine extended heat event, 2+ weeks with no rainfall and sustained extreme temperatures, do you intervene, and then once. One slow, deep soak at the base of the plant in early morning. Water on soil, never on foliage. Then leave it alone again. First-year plants installed this spring are the exception. Their roots are still shallow and confined near the planting hole. They get a deep morning soak roughly once a week during genuinely dry spells. Container lavender is its own category. Pots dry fast and may need water every few days in August heat. But the same rules govern. Morning only, at the base, and only after your finger confirms the top few inches of compost are actually dry. Never let a container sit in a saucer holding drainage water. Evening watering is the worst option available for lavender, and it is the default for most people because that is when we have time. A lavender watered in the evening sits damp through the entire night. Warm, still humid night air around damp foliage and a damp crown is precisely what fungal pathogens are waiting for. Step 5. Clear the crown and swap the mulch for grit. This takes 2 minutes and prevents more August lavender losses than anything else on this list that does not involve a pair of shears. If you mulched your beds this spring with bark, compost, or wood chips, excellent practice for most of your garden. That organic mulch is actively working against your lavender wherever it touches the base of the plant. It holds moisture against the stems. It keeps the crown humid. It creates exactly the microclimate that crown rot develops during warm weather. Pull all organic mulch back to create a clear bare ring around the base of every lavender plant, roughly a handspan wide in every direction. Then improve on it. Fill that cleared ring with pea gravel, horticultural grit, or coarse sand. Mediterranean growers have used this technique for centuries, and it works 3 ways simultaneously. It dries the crown rapidly after rainfall instead of holding moisture against it. It prevents soil splashing up onto the lower stems during heavy rain, which is how a number of fungal pathogens move from soil to plant, and it reflects light and warmth back up into the base of the plant, which lavender responds to positively. It also makes the silver foliage look considerably sharper against pale stone, which is a genuine aesthetic upgrade you get for free alongside the plant health benefit. Step 6. Keep the fertilizer in the shed. This one runs against every instinct because August is when you are feeding tomatoes, feeding containers, feeding roses. The lavender gets included in the rounds because it seems reasonable that a flowering plant in midsummer would benefit from nutrition. It does not. Lavender flowers best in lean soil, and this is the part that surprises people. The essential oils that produce its fragrance concentrate when the plant grows slightly hard and slightly slow. Feed it in August, and you get a flush of soft, sappy dark green growth that flops open, carries noticeably less fragrance, and in cooler zones fails to harden before winter and becomes the first tissue killed by frost. If your lavender flowered poorly this year and you genuinely suspect a soil problem, note it and address it next spring with grit worked into the planting area, and at most a very light low nitrogen feed as growth begins. In August, the most useful thing in your fertilizer cupboard is a closed door. Step 7. Open up the air. Almost nobody does this, and it costs nothing. Your garden filled out over the last 4 months. The perennials you planted a respectful distance from your lavender in April have grown, leaned, and in some cases flopped directly over it. Ornamental grasses have expanded. And your lavender, a plant that evolved on open, exposed hillsides with constant air movement, is now sitting in a pocket of still humid air surrounded by dense foliage. Take 5 minutes and clear a margin around every lavender in your garden. Cut back or stake up whatever has grown into its space so air moves freely through and around the plant. In humid summer climates, the Southeast, the Mid-Atlantic, the Ohio Valley, this single adjustment does as much for disease prevention as any product you could apply. Step 8. Turn those trimmings into free plants. Now go get the stems you set aside in that jar. August is prime time for lavender cuttings because the current season's stems are at the stage propagators call semi-ripe. Firm enough at the base that they resist rotting, soft enough at the tip that they still root readily. Earlier in the season, they are too soft. Later, they are too woody. Right now is the window. Select stems roughly the length of your hand with no flower attached. Strip the leaves from the bottom half. Push each one about 2/3 of its length into a pot of gritty compost. Standard potting compost cut half and half with sharp sand or perlite is ideal. Water once. Place the pots somewhere bright but out of direct afternoon sun. Keep the compost barely moist and never wet. In 4 to 6 weeks, a gentle tug meets resistance. That resistance is roots. Every rooted cutting is a free lavender plant for next spring, for a hedge, for containers, for gifts. Grown from material you were about to throw on the compost heap. Overwinter them in a bright, cool, frost-free location and plant them out after your last frost date. Here is the entire August playbook in order. Find your first frost date and confirm whether your cutting window is open or closed. Read the spikes and act when half have faded. Make the one cut. Spent flower stem plus the top third of green growth, never into brown wood, shaped into a dome. Put the hose down unless you are in a genuine heat event. And when you do water, it is a deep morning soak at the base only. Pull organic mulch off the crown and replace it with gravel or grit. Keep the fertilizer locked away until spring. Clear a margin for airflow, and turn the trimmings into next year's plants. None of this is difficult. All of it is timed, and for most of you watching, the timing is right now. Subscribe if you have not already. Hit the bell, and drop 2 things in the comments. What state or zone you are gardening in, and whether your lavender's first flush has finished fading yet. I read every single comment. Your answers shape the next video directly. Your lavender gave you a full season of bloom. Do not waste what comes after it.